welcome to this Ereignis podcast. Today we are talking to Adam Staley Groves, who is a teacher with the Ereignis Institute. Adam, you're teaching a course on Wallace Stevens. Do you just want to explain a little bit about what students can learn from that course?
Sure. My course on Wallace Stevens focuses mainly on his prose theory, and it came out of my research at the University of Aberdeen. And essentially what I did was explore the relationship between Wallace Stevens and Jean Val, who was a very important French philosopher, existence philosopher. And essentially what I do is look at how Stevens has an insight into what later becomes the theory industry, so to speak, after the Second World War. And what I also do is look at Stevens' theory in prose primarily as a way to understand sort of a proto-philosophic, proto-theoretic framing of what's called technic. And I look at poetry as a way, according to Wallace Stevens and others that I associate with him, but primarily Wallace Stevens, as a way to understand the technical minimality of poetry as a practiced fine art, as a way to understand how to engage technology, how to live with technology, how to understand the self in relation or within the technology itself. And so poetry, in particular, the irrational element in poetry, one of Stevens's prose, is pretty much where I base the nugget of the teaching, and examine how that sort of lays the original scaffold for the rest of Stevens' prose theory, which is often misunderstood or sort of discarded by critics. So essentially, what I arrive at is something called contra-criticism, meaning that, and following Baudelaire, who gave us the term modernity, that poets often are forced to become critics, and they're forced to become critics as poets. And essentially what that means is that they are linked to some kind of what he calls divine precepts, which they can't explain. So they're forced to reason about it, to rationalize something they can't explain. And that means that they have the basis of a supreme type of reasoning or rationality or criticism of the self, which is different than a person who becomes a critic by profession. And so contra-criticism then uses the concepts of Stevens to move against industrial criticism, let's say, the theory in critical industry, which has misunderstood or discarded Stevens' theoretical insight. So that's the seminar in a nutshell.
You are also an artist yourself. You're a painter and a poet, and you have some ideas about what is an artist. How would you approach that question? What is an artist, Adam?
Well, I can speak of it from two ways, right? The one that is the artist in person, right? The artist as a personality, which comes from practice, and I think that's where we can call people artists by vocation or profession. But the disposition is one that I find a little more difficult. I have always practiced what are called arts, right? But I got away from visual art and painting and drawing for quite a while and focused on poetry. But again, I'm already setting up this idea that artists are born and not made, as Stevens says about poets. Poets are born or not made, as probably Baudelaire would say, and others. This is what is called like a type of birthright. I don't think that that's true. And probably my friends don't agree, but I don't think it's true. And I think it's not true because of well, in one way, technology. And another way that to say that there's only some people could be artists and others cannot is a joke to me. I don't understand why we have to have this distinction. And I think that there might be a level of power or politics behind that. Also, you know, casting someone as a kind of holy object, right? That you're a star, so therefore you're an artist, and that you're only, how to put it, only certain people can be this celebrity. You know, there's a conflation of artist and celebrity as well, and so forth. So for me, it's complicated. I identify as a painter now, but I did not identify as a painter for a long time. I've painted before. And so there's some very clear things that I think that when one is a painter, then of course they're either an amateur or a professional painter. But beneath all of that, I think, is poetry. Now, whether or not one is a poet and they have to become a painter is a completely different thing. But my understanding is that in every art, and by every art I mean whatever we do that has a creative or requires a vision or a manifestation, concerns poetry. But to be a poet is something that I don't think is as much of a choice in the beginning. One can study poetry and one can learn about poetry, but to be a poet is to realize certain, how to put it, become aware of circumstances that are in their life. Then you understand the poetry that is with us all, right? But to be a poet as one who writes poems, to be Blake or to be any kind of poet like that is a different thing, right?
I know that you have some ideas about America's former president Donald Trump, and the image, if you will, of the artist, and you see there are some commonalities or analogies between these images.
Yeah. Okay, so Trump, right? We don't think he's an artist, right? But this is the point. What Trump does is he doesn't have common sense, right? He's not someone who or he operates at a certain margin between common and uncommon sense. The way he used social media was really actually quite brilliant, right? And he followed that thread and he followed that instinct. Now, what he does is access the unfamiliar, which is in time and history, and creates the familiar, creates and controls literally a whole entire established American political party, most of it. And that is the work of an artist. They introduce something into common sense, which was not there before, using the debris and particles of history. But you can't say it's just Trump. There are other artists associated in this far-right movement, right? Michelle Bachmann was an early one, Sarah Palin, who's making a comeback, and other figures that had been using the signals and signs of the past to create the reality which they have made. And so the reason, and this is sort of what Contra-Critic is about as well, when I read the critics of Wallace Stevens, I say, look, let's look at what kind of poet this critic is. That's why I don't agree with The Birthright, because there is no way that we can understand each other in our own humanity if we say some people can't be like others. And I know that's a very relativistic thing to say, but we're dealing with the general sort of the general thing about a human being. General things. So are they a destructive poet, or are they a poet of fulfillment, growth, right? And not all growth is good, etc. Not all art is good, etc. So I'm working in that same way with Trump and saying that, what kind of artist is he?
Mhm.
And I think the answer, of course, is a destructive one, right? An annihilation type of artist. And not even an artist which you could say he's a violent artist. He could be a subtle artist. He could be he could have any kind of aesthetic dimension. But the type of artist that he is, and if we can understand him as an artist, then we can get past some of the barriers we have to accepting him as a human being, right? And if we can accept him as a human being, then we can guard in a sort of supremely empathetic way our own humanity from this sort of gross polarization and look more into the complex and, let's say, exponentially unfurling world that we should be building.
Thank you, Adam. This was a podcast from the Ereignis Center for Philosophy and the Arts. We offer course modules on topics in contemporary philosophy. We publish books and host events. To find out more, visit our website at www.ereignis.no.